We just recorded a podcast with Brenda Gallagher, one of your students and colleagues as well. And we discussed that bookbinder constantly learns new things and finds new tricks and gets new ideas on how to better or differently do something. So besides this experience with inkjet paper, what were your recent, findings and new things these eureka moments in bookbinding?
It's hard to give anything specific about that right now. I would have to say that dealing with the inkjet papers did give me a lot more information about just gilding in general.
Yeah.
It made me further aware of the differences in the papers that you have to deal with. For instance, I'm doing some gilding right now on a new Bible. It was printed on India paper. It's a typical Bible. It had a machine gilt edge when it was sent to me, but the owner wanted what they call a red under edge. There's a hand gilt edge, but a red background to it. And I've actually found it particularly hard to get a really beautiful edge on it. The red under is not a problem. The paper is so hard that any wrinkle in the leaf when you lay it down will show. When I was doing the inkjet paper, the wrinkles wouldn't show.
Yeah.
So I was going between a really hard paper and a really soft paper. And that's one of the things that we have to face nowadays, is that papers are sort of all over the map now. We're not working on books with nice, well-sized handmade papers that often. So we're just faced with such a broad variety. I would say, though, that the eureka moments come not as big things with the heavens breaking open and rays of sun shooting through. It's more like when you're doing a lot of one process at a time, you make minor adjustments in how you do the process. If you do just one book, you can't appreciate this. When you're doing hundreds of books, you appreciate how just simply where you stack the books. Like I'm working with another binder in this building right now, and you'll see evidence of this when we start looking around the shop. We're doing a 3-volume set of a collection of art books. And there are 52 sets. So there's 120 regular bindings. There's 36, and the regular bindings are going to be half leather. Then there's 36 that are going to be full leather. Each individual book is getting its own slipcase. The half leather bindings are going to get half leather slipcases. The full leather bindings are going to get full leather slipcases. And the books, they're like about 32 centimeters tall, and they're around 25 centimeters wide, and they're like 4.5, 5 centimeters thick. So they're good size. It's going to take the other binder, Mark Tomlinson, has his own shop, and he works by himself. So there's myself and my 2 employees, and the 4 of us are going to spend 6 months doing this these books. So I'm in the process of punching the holes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a hole punching gadget.
Yeah.
And I start with the stack of pages on the left side of the hole punch. And as I punch them, I move them to the right side. And that's sort of the way I've always been doing it. I was doing this yesterday and I realized if I had the stack that I'm punching the holes in on the left side and the stack I have punched on the left side, it means I am just moving from the left to the machine back to the left instead of going left, machine, right. It's these tiny little changes in how you operate can be key things, key insights, not only about speeding it up, but in how you turn an end cap, how you form a leather corner, just things like this. It's, you want to go at your work. I hate the word mindful because it's become such a cliche, but you need to pay attention to what you're doing. And if somebody tells you to do it this way, thank them very nice, try it that way. Even when I'm teaching at AAB, I make my students aware that the way I am teaching them is a way.
One of the ways, yeah.
But it is not the only way. So you take what you learn. First, you should do it that way because you need to get it into your bones and into your brain and your hands. But then start to question it. Talk to other binders, see what you can come up with on your own, see what you can learn from other binders. And by and large, most binders nowadays are more than willing to share what they know.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also true that not only speed is important, speed is often important for large projects like you described, but lowering the margin of error is also very important. Fewer errors you make, less time you spend on fixing these errors afterwards. So it's and standardized routines and routines that are comfortable for you and logical for you are very important in lowering this number of errors, because if something is not working for you, you will make a mistake.
Yes, yes. Well, and you bring up an interesting point about errors. Errors, obviously, they're to be avoided, but you can learn so much from an error. When I was working at Harcourt, every once in a while, the person doing the gold tooling, they might make a mistake and misspell something in the title, or they might burn one of the center tools, putting it into a panel. Well, at Harcourt, the way we would often do the tooling there is that we do what they call a panel in centers, which means you've got a rectilinear gold line defining each panel of the spine, and you have a center tool in them. So I got to be pretty good at taking my knife and incising out alongside the tooled gold line and removing that panel, replacing the panel and feathering the edge so that I could give it back to the finisher, and that person could retool the gold lines and then put the new center tool or the new titling in there. And sometimes you couldn't even tell a change was ever made, but you get to be skilled at using your tools and knowing the materials, knowing how far you can push them before there's an issue, that kind of thing. So there's a lot you can learn from making mistakes. Not that I advocate making them.
This reminds me of one of the experiences I had with Don Glaser while studying at the AAB on his course, so on fine binding. So when I was making one of the leather bindings, and while I was pairing the leather, I made a cut exactly at the same level, so that when turned in, this cut landed on the edge of the cardboard.
Yes.
And yeah, I was upset, and leather is expensive, especially when you are a young student, and time also is not expensive, but it's time, and you don't want to spend a lot of time preparing leather once again. And Don came to me and he was like, okay, I don't know if we can fix it, but we will try. And we found a way. We slapped a piece of blue tape over this cut, and I turned it in. And nowadays I still have this book, and because I gave it to my wife, and well, she has this book. Nowadays I cannot find where this cut is because it was fixed properly.
Right. And well, and as Don said, I don't know if we can fix this, but I have to say that for me, the most exciting thing about doing what I do is trying to figure this stuff out. And it's not just figuring out mistakes. As you'll see with some of the work we've done here, figuring out how to create the effect we want requires a lot of head scratching, experimentation and stuff like that. But it's that kind of thing that enables somebody with as much experience as Don or myself has of coming to you when you've got that problem and being able to quickly calculate in their head a very plausible way of dealing with it. And you know, that's what you get from doing the work, is you get that, you just get that backlog of knowledge. And even if you don't know how to do something, you can pretty well formulate a fairly decent way that it might work.
You talk a lot about techniques, about mastering techniques and knowing a material, specifically leather, I assume in your case. But so much of modern bookbinding is about using new materials and combining materials in novel ways. I know there has always been something like that in design bindings. You can find late 19th century bindings using eggshell inlays, say, or something something exotic. But overall, I'd say that it's mostly in post-war and even maybe late 20th century bookbinding that you get proliferation of new materials. What was your experience with that?
I like new materials. I don't use a lot of different things. I may use metal. I use magnets. I use plastic. You know, things like that. In the shop, we have decorated silk, for instance, to use as a binding. We've decorated paper plenty of times to use as a binding. There are other people who get more into exotics, and I would call them exotics just because they don't fit into traditional binding per se. But if I found that there was a material that fit what I wanted to do and it wasn't a binding material, I'd just figure out how to use it, is what it comes down to. And I mean, you know, you'll also come up against a time when, all right, maybe I can't figure it out. In which case, okay, I have to change my idea about what I wanted. But boy, you push the edge as far as you can until the rubber band breaks, trying to figure out how you're going to do it. And there's plenty of nice materials out there to explore with. So, you know, I think people should really do that. I mean, don't do it to be novel. Do it because it fits with what you're trying to say, with what you're doing. I can't stand it when people do things because they can do it. I prefer to do it because it's the appropriate thing for the direction they're going with the design or the type of binding. And Lord knows when you're doing, when you've got a publisher bringing something to you, you're going to be faced sometimes with materials or techniques that you haven't had to deal with. And they haven't necessarily thought through themselves, but by the time it comes to you, it could be a little too late to say, well, that's not going to work. So then it falls to you to figure out how to make it work.
When you allow yourself to step out of your comfort zone and try something different, try something new, you may find out that there are so many beautiful things around you.
Oh, yeah. Well, in teaching, and I know we're going to get onto that in a second, but the way I learned, and this is sort of what I try to impart to students, is that I got a smattering of teaching by going to every single workshop I could find. I actually live 2 hours west of Boston.
Mhm.
I used to live in Boston, especially when I was at Harcourt. And every time, Bernard Middleton, Tina Muir, Philip Smith, Ola Olson, these people would come through and I would take their classes, and try and learn as much as I could, even though they were doing things differently than I was learning. So I really tried to get a broad amount of knowledge, but then once I had that, I tried to bring it back into a tighter grouping of techniques that I could master myself. Once I got those techniques fairly well understood, then I would go back out onto the branches of the tree again and start looking for little things that I could add to what I was doing, or maybe ways I could change what I was doing. But I found it, first it was just, there was an overload of information coming in.
Mhm.
And so I had to pull that into a tighter thing so I could focus and learn. But then when you've got that, you can go back out and get all this other neat stuff out there and meet other people and learn ways they do things and alter what you do, and just have this nice back and forth with other binders, and sometimes with other craftspeople who are not binders, to learn stuff. So yeah, I'm glad the barriers are disappearing.